I was elbow-deep in a Labrador's mouth, trying to extract a stubborn piece of bark wedged between his molars, when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I almost ignored it. Dr. Kenner was already tense about us checking messages during shifts, but something in my chest clenched, that strange internal jolt you get when something is off. I finished with the dog, gave his owner a brief smile, and stepped into the supply room to check. It was an email from Travis. The subject line, "I need to tell you this now." My heart stumbled. I opened it with one swipe. The words blurred before I even got halfway through. "I'm sorry, Celeste. I never meant to hurt you. But I've fallen in love with someone else. Her name is Amber. We've decided to start fresh. I took the camper. I know it's in your name. I'll figure things out. Please don't try to find us." I reread it 3 times before my brain caught up. I stared at the screen, trying to will it into meaning something else. The camper? The $35,000 van that had arrived 2 weeks ago? The one we picked out together? The one I signed for because his credit was shot and mine, like always, was reliable? My breath came in uneven bursts, a panic rising in my throat so fast it burned. I fumbled to dial his number, fingers clumsy, as if they didn't belong to me. The phone rang once. Twice. Then his voice answered, flat, detached, unfamiliar. "Yeah? Travis." My voice cracked. "What the hell is this? What kind of sick joke?" "I didn't want it to be like this," he said, and that was all it took. Not denial. Not guilt. Just quiet resignation. I steadied myself on the metal shelf beside me, the edge digging into my palm. "You left? Just like that? Took the van? Are you serious right now?" There was a pause. I could hear faint wind in the background. I didn't know how else to do it. "How about not doing it like a coward?" I snapped, heat rushing to my face. "You used my name, my credit. That's theft, Travis." "I'll make it right," he muttered. "Eventually." "Eventually?" I whispered, stunned. "You just walked out on me and Mason like we're some project you're done with." "I'm sorry," he said again, softer this time, like that would somehow dull the knife. "I really am. But I'm not coming back. Don't call again." Then he hung up. For a second, I stood in silence. Just stood there, holding the phone to my ear long after the line went dead. The sterile scent of antiseptic curled in my nose. My legs began to shake, and I stumbled backward onto a stool, gripping my knees to stay upright. My vision blurred again, this time from tears I didn't want to cry. Not here, not now, not like this. I should have seen it. The late nights. The random distance. The way he'd brushed off talks about our future. But I'd made excuses. I'd believed in the man who once brought me roses in the dead of winter because I said I missed color. The man who laughed with Mason in the kitchen over pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. I tried to pull myself together. Work wasn't over. I still had 2 cats scheduled for vaccines and an elderly beagle with a skin infection coming in at 4. I couldn't afford to fall apart. Not yet. But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I stood slowly, shoved the phone back into my pocket, and splashed cold water on my face in the staff bathroom. The mirror showed someone I barely recognized, pale, eyes wide and glassy, mouth pressed tight like holding back a scream. I pressed a damp paper towel to my cheeks and repeated softly, "You're okay. You're okay. Just get through the day." When my shift ended, I sat in my car and stared out the windshield for 10 full minutes before starting the engine. My house, the one Travis and I bought 6. I thought I was holding it together. That's what I kept telling myself, over and over, every morning when I pried myself out of bed and forced a smile in the mirror. Mason needed me. The clinic needed me. Bills didn't care about heartbreak. So I pushed through the fog, nodded through conversations, kept my shoulders straight and my voice even. No one needed to know that I felt like I was sleepwalking through my own life. The day of the training session started like any other. I burned my toast. Mason had forgotten to pack his gym clothes again. The cat had thrown up on the carpet. Just the usual chaos. I was tired, sure, but that wasn't new. I'd been running on fumes for weeks, skipping meals, downing caffeine like water, staying up too late combing through bank statements I didn't want to look at. I was sure it would all pass. I just needed to survive a little longer. At work, the waiting room smelled like antiseptic and nervous dogs. The staff lounge was buzzing with chatter, everyone settling into folding chairs, passing out clipboards and stale muffins. I took my seat at the back, my limbs heavy. The speaker droned on about updated safety protocols, but the words washed over me in waves. My head pulsed, the overhead lights stabbing through my eyes like needles. And then, everything blurred. One moment I was scribbling on the margin of the handout to keep myself awake, and the next, the room tilted hard to the left. My heart thudded in my ears. I blinked, trying to right myself, but the floor rushed up faster than I could react. Someone screamed my name. I felt hands grab my shoulders, heard someone shout to call 911, but I couldn't respond. My body had betrayed me. The darkness swallowed everything. When I opened my eyes, everything was white. White ceiling. White sheets. The sterile beep of machines. The smell of alcohol wipes and rubber gloves filled my nostrils. My throat was dry, and I struggled to turn my head. "You're awake." Dr. Ramirez, the ER physician, stood beside me, clipboard in hand, her eyes tired but kind. "You collapsed at work. EMS said your blood pressure was dangerously low. You're severely dehydrated, and we ran blood work. It shows signs of acute stress, borderline malnutrition. Your body's in survival mode, Celeste." I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my ribs like a crack of lightning. "Easy," she said, pressing a hand to my shoulder. "We also found a ruptured ovarian cyst. You'll need minor surgery. We can't put it off." Surgery. The word echoed, bouncing between my ears. My lips were too dry to ask the questions forming in my mind. How long would I be out of work? How much would this cost? Who would take care of Mason? As if summoned, the door creaked open and Mason stepped in. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed in red, but he was trying to be brave. He clutched a paper bag from the hospital cafeteria in one hand and looked so small standing there that my heart cracked open. "Hey, baby," I whispered. He rushed to my side, and his arms wrapped around me gently, like he was afraid he'd break me. "You scared me." "I'm okay now," I said, though I wasn't sure if it was true. "Just a little tired." "You passed out, Mom. They had to put you in an ambulance." I closed my eyes briefly, then opened them to meet his. "I didn't mean to." I didn't even know how bad it had gotten. He sat down on the edge of the bed and took my hand. His fingers were warm and grounding. "Are you gonna die?" The question hit me like a brick to the chest. I looked at his wide, fearful eyes and knew in that moment that I couldn't keep falling apart. No matter how exhausted I felt. No matter how much Travis had broken me. I was Mason's only constant now. "No," I said firmly, squeezing his hand. "I'm not going anywhere. I promise." He let out a breath like he'd been holding it in for hours. "Good. Because I don't want it to just be me." "It won't be," I said, brushing his hair from his face. "I'm going to be okay. I have to be. For you." It wasn't just a promise. It was a vow. Something shifted inside me in that hospital bed, surrounded by machines and cold linens and the eyes of a boy who needed me to be strong. I'd spent weeks trying to survive, barely hanging on, pretending I wasn't drowning. But this was my line in the sand. I couldn't afford to collapse again. I had to fight my way back. Not for Travis. Not to prove anything to anyone else. But for Mason. And for me. Recovery was supposed to feel like a step forward. But all I could feel was the aching reminder that I'd let myself fall apart. The stitches pulled when I reached too far, my muscles were weak from the days in the hospital bed, and my mind, well, that was a whole different kind of fragile. I told myself that rest was part of healing, that slowing down was necessary. But every quiet moment at home reminded me of everything I had lost, and everything that still threatened to unravel. It was a rainy Thursday when the letter came. I was sitting on the couch, a heating pad across my stomach, trying to will myself to eat more than crackers and tea. Mason was at school, and the silence in the house felt too loud. When I heard the mail slot click, I didn't rush to check. I didn't need another medical bill or an ad for gutter cleaning. But something tugged at me, that anxious flutter in my gut that hadn't left since Travis disappeared. I opened the envelope slowly. The paper inside was thick and official-looking, with my full name printed across the top. My stomach dropped before I even read the first line. Demand for immediate payment. I sank down into the nearest chair, the letter trembling in my hand. The van loan. Of course. It was under my name. My signature. And Travis had been gone for weeks. $35,000. The words blurred as I blinked, my breath catching in my chest. I hadn't made a single payment yet. The first one was due next week. They wanted confirmation, verification, something to prove I was still in possession of the vehicle or face legal action. I pushed the papers aside and turned on my laptop with shaking hands. I logged into our joint account, or rather, what used to be our joint account. And then I froze. $0. I stared at the screen like it was lying. I refreshed the page. Again. But the number stayed the same. I went to the savings account. It was worse. Account closed. A cold sweat crept across my back. I clicked through statements, desperate for answers. And there it was, one massive withdrawal a week after the email. $22,000. My emergency savings. The cushion I'd built over 6 years, little by little, skipping dinners out, postponing vacations, saying no to things I wanted just to make sure we'd always have something to fall back on. Gone. He'd taken it all. Without a word. Without a shred of decency. While I lay in a hospital bed with an 4 in my arm, trying to reassure our son that I wouldn't die, Travis had drained every cent we had left. I don't remember standing. One moment I was staring at the screen, and the next I was pacing the kitchen, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the rain hitting the windows. I grabbed the counter, bracing myself, trying to breathe through the wave of nausea that followed. Everything was gone. The van, the money, the man I married. I had nothing left. I must have made a sound because Mason appeared in the doorway, his backpack slung over one shoulder, concern written across his face. Mom? I turned too quickly. He caught me before I stumbled. What happened? He asked. Are you okay? I wanted to lie. I wanted to say I was just tired or that I spilled something or that everything was fine. But I couldn't keep doing that. Not to him. Not anymore. I sank to the floor, my back against the cabinet. Mason sat beside me without a word. He took it all, I said quietly. The savings. Every last cent. And the loan company, they're coming after me for the van. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at me with those calm, steady eyes. The same eyes he had when I cried in the hospital. The same ones I saw in the mirror when I could still pretend I had control over my life. He left us with nothing, I whispered. Mason reached over and placed his hand on my shoulder. We can fix this, he said, and he said it like it was a fact, not just hope. We have to. I stared at him, this boy who was growing up too fast because of the choices his father made. He should have been worried about school dances or video games, not how to rebuild the life his parents had shattered. How do you always sound older than me when things fall apart? I asked, forcing a weak smile. He gave a shrug. Maybe because I still believe we'll get through it. Something cracked open in me then, not more pain, but the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not joy. Not even relief, but resolve. I pulled him into a hug, holding on tighter than I probably should have, wincing against the healing incision in my abdomen. He didn't pull away. We'll figure it out, I murmured into his hair. Because what else could we do? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake listening to the soft rhythm of the rain tapping against the windows and the faint hum of Mason's sound machine in the next room. My body was still healing, but my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Travis's signature on my bank account, my name on that camper van loan, the zeros in my savings. The weight of it sat on my chest like a cinder block. I didn't hear Mason's door open, but suddenly he was in the hallway, peeking into my room. You're awake, he said, not even asking. I sat up slowly, patting the bed. Yeah, come in. He climbed onto the mattress, pulling the throw blanket around his shoulders. He didn't look like a little kid anymore. Not really. There was a seriousness behind his eyes lately, one that made me ache with guilt and pride all at once. He stared down at his hands for a second, then looked up at me. I've been thinking, he said. About what? He took a breath, as if bracing himself. About Dad. About how we could find him. Mason, I began gently, we don't need to. No, just listen, he said quickly. You remember that hike we did a few weeks ago? The one at Lake Bishop? I nodded. We'd all gone for a day trip, me, Travis, Mason. It had been one of the rare good days, or so I thought at the time. Travis had even smiled and taken a picture of me and Mason at the overlook. Well, Mason continued, you guys didn't know, but I'd been asking for a kid's phone for months, and I finally talked you both into it. It has a GPS tracker built in. I stared at him. You still have it? He nodded and reached into the pocket of his hoodie, pulling out a small, scuffed-up smartphone with a cracked corner. It's a kid's model, limited features, but it tracks locations. I left it in the camper the day we went hiking. It was charging on the shelf behind the driver's seat. Dad didn't notice. I blinked, trying to piece the implications together. Wait. You're saying we can track him? Right now. Mason gave a tiny smile. Yeah. I checked earlier today. The signal's still active. I stared at him, utterly stunned. My 12-year-old had done what I hadn't even considered. While I was drowning in panic and pain, he had quietly found the only breadcrumb that might lead us back to the man who had wrecked our lives. I took the phone from him, my hands suddenly steadier than they'd been in days. The app loaded slowly, the tiny spinning while taunting me. Then a map appeared. A red blinking hovered just outside a town called Cypress Woods, nearly 2 hours north. It's been there for 3 days now, Mason said. He must be camping out there. My mind spun with questions, calculations, possibilities. We could drive up, I said slowly. We could find the van, take pictures, report him for theft. Mason nodded. And I've been reading about legal stuff, too. I went to the library after school the other day. If you have proof the van is in your name, and he took it without consent, that's a crime. Plus, if you can show the bank records where he emptied your account, we can file charges. I looked at him, mouth slightly open. You've been researching this? He nodded. I couldn't just sit around. I want him to know he can't just disappear and leave us with nothing. And I want to help you fix this. I pulled him into a hug so fast it startled him. I held him tightly, my voice thick with emotion. You're amazing. Do you know that? You're the bravest, smartest kid I've ever known. He shrugged into my shoulder. You always say that. Because it's always true. When we pulled apart, he gave me a look, one that was too mature for his age, but also deeply him. We don't have to do it all at once, he said. But we can start. We can get the van back. We can report the fraud. And if Dad thinks we're just going to let him get away with this, he's wrong. He sounded so calm, so resolved. It should have broken my heart that he was thinking in legal terms, strategizing like an adult instead of being a kid with simple worries. But right then, all I felt was an unexpected wave of strength. Because I wasn't doing this alone anymore. I had him. And we were in this together. Okay, I said, clutching the phone. Then let's do it. Let's find him. We didn't have much. No money. No backup. No help. But we had a tracker, a plan, and a shared resolve to take back what was stolen. For the first time in weeks, I felt something ignite in me that Travis hadn't managed to take. Fight. And Mason had lit the match. 3 days. That's how long we watched the little blinking red sit still on Mason's phone screen like it was taunting us. It didn't move an inch, and that stillness was our confirmation. Travis was staying put. Cypress Woods Campground. I had never heard of it before, but I'd memorized the name by the first hour. It was time. I checked and double-checked the paperwork. The camper van registration in my name, the financing agreement with my signature, the bank withdrawal history. I printed every document I could find and packed it into a manila folder so thick it barely closed. Mason sat beside me, quietly helping, methodical, focused, almost eerily calm. I watched him with this strange combination of pride and sorrow. He should have been stressing about a test or a forgotten science project, not prepping to confront his father over stolen property and emotional abandonment. Got everything? He asked as I slid the folder into my tote bag. Yeah, I said, giving the bag a pat. Ready to go? He nodded, eyes serious. Let's get the keys back. The drive was quiet at first, just the soft hum of tires and the occasional click of the turn signal. But as we neared Cypress Woods, anxiety twisted tighter in my chest. What if he denied everything? What if he refused to come out of the camper? What if he looked me in the eye and didn't even feel sorry? As we turned down the winding gravel road toward the campground, Mason pointed. There. The camper van sat parked under a thicket of pine trees, tucked near a fire pit and folding chairs that hadn't been folded in days. It looked exactly the same, except now it had a string of fairy lights hung sloppily along the awning and a gaudy pink flamingo lawn ornament planted in the dirt nearby. I didn't recognize the SUV parked beside it, but I knew, without a doubt, that it belonged to her. I parked far enough away that we wouldn't be spotted immediately. My hands were cold, even though the air was humid. Mason leaned forward, peering through the windshield. He's inside, he murmured. Lights are on. I turned to him. You don't have to come with me. You can stay in the car. He shook his head. No. I want to see this. We stepped out and walked across the gravel path like we belonged there. Like this wasn't about to turn my stomach inside out. The closer we got, the more I could hear low voices, music playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker. The sound of laughter. I knocked hard on the camper door. It wasn't polite. It wasn't hesitant. It was sharp and final. The laughter stopped. A second later, the door creaked open. Travis's face appeared in the doorway. Tanned, unshaven, wearing a hoodie I'd bought him 2 Christmases ago. For a second, his face froze, eyes widening in surprise, then quickly hardening into defensiveness. Celeste, he said, voice flat. Give me the keys, I said. No small talk. No rehearsed speeches. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him, probably to keep Amber from hearing us. Too late. Look, I didn't expect. Save it, I snapped, pulling the folder from my tote bag. This van is legally mine. You stole it. You drove off with a vehicle in my name and emptied our savings account. Do you have any idea how many laws you've broken? His eyes flickered to Mason and then back to me. I didn't steal anything. We both used that account. You took everything, Travis. While I was in the hospital, recovering from surgery, you left your son without a word. You think I won't file charges? He started to speak, but the camper door opened before he could. Amber stepped out in a tank top and shorts, a coffee mug in one hand, her expression bored. What's the big deal now? Mason looked her square in the eye. You're living in a stolen vehicle. Amber rolled her eyes and muttered something under her breath. I turned back to Travis. I want the keys. Now. We are not married. You have no legal claim to that van. A small crowd was starting to gather now, campers craning their necks, stepping out from under their awnings to watch the show. Travis glanced around nervously, as if realizing for the first time how public this had become. I was gonna bring it back, he muttered. Not good enough, I snapped. You don't get to borrow a $35,000 van and vanish with my money and call it a misunderstanding. Amber snorted, taking a step forward. She's just mad she got left. Mason didn't even blink. She's mad you stole from her. And so am I. Amber raised an eyebrow. Isn't he a little young to be involved in grown-up business? Mason's voice was like steel. I'm the one who tracked you down. That got her attention. Her eyes narrowed, but I didn't give her time to speak again. Keys, Travis, I said, holding out my hand. There was a long silence. Then, without another word, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the key ring, and dropped it into my palm. And just like that, something inside me clicked back into place. I turned around and walked to the van, unlocking the door with shaking hands. The smell of pine and cigarette smoke hit me first. But there it was. Mine again. I turned to see Travis still standing there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. Amber looked annoyed, arms crossed, already losing interest. You're lucky I'm not calling the cops right now, I said. But trust me, this isn't over. And it wasn't. Because getting the van back was only step 1. I'd spent enough time being the one left behind. Now, it was my turn to take back what was mine. The camper van door creaked as it swung shut behind me, the sound loud and final in the tension-filled air. Inside, the space looked exactly how I imagined Travis would live, half-unpacked bags, fast food wrappers on the counter, clothes in messy piles, and emptiness dressed up as freedom. Mason followed me in silently, his eyes scanning every corner like he was cataloging evidence in a crime scene. I watched him linger on the photos taped to the wall, snapshots of Travis and Amber smiling at campgrounds, a couple of blurry selfies, one where Amber kissed Travis's cheek. None of us. No trace of the family he'd left behind. Travis sat on the edge of the small bed, hands clasped between his knees, trying to look composed. It didn't work. I stood across from him, arms crossed, while Mason leaned against the counter, unreadable. For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the fan overhead. "Why?" Mason finally asked. Travis looked up, startled. "Why what? Why did you leave? Why didn't you say goodbye? Why did you just disappear?" His voice didn't waver, but I could hear the quiet betrayal underneath it. I saw it in the way his shoulders tightened. Travis rubbed his hands over his face like he could wipe away the truth. "I didn't know how to explain it," he said. "I didn't want to hurt you guys." "You did anyway," Mason replied flatly. "And now you don't even live in a real house. You live in a van." Travis glanced at me, as if hoping I'd jump in, but I stayed silent. I wanted to hear what he'd say to his son now that there was no running away. "I needed something different," he muttered. I felt trapped. Like I couldn't breathe in that life anymore. "You mean the life where your wife paid the bills and your kid waited for you to show up to his games?" I asked, voice sharper than I meant. He flinched, then turned his gaze to Mason. "It wasn't you. You know that, right?" "I love you, Mason." "I always will." Mason didn't blink. "Then why did you leave me?" It hung there in the air, raw and unanswerable. Before Travis could respond, Amber burst through the door with a dramatic sigh, holding her phone in one hand and a drink in the other. "Are we really doing this right now?" she asked. "Because I didn't sign up for group therapy in a tin can." Travis looked like he might combust. "Amber, not now." She tossed her long, wavy hair over her shoulder and looked me up and down with a smug smile. "You always looked tired in your photos. Guess now I see why." He needed someone a little more energetic. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. But Mason took a step forward, arms folded, head tilted. "You know," he said, cool and calm, "I did the math." Amber blinked. "What math?" "The pregnancy. The timeline," he said. "You started seeing my dad in August, right?" She narrowed her eyes. "What does that matter?" "Well, that would mean you'd be around 4 months pregnant now. But when you showed up in those pictures from September, you already had a bump. Big enough to see." I froze. I hadn't caught that. But Mason had. And I knew he was right. Amber's lips curled. So unless my dad was with you long before August, that baby isn't his." The silence that followed was instant and thick. Travis's head snapped toward her. "Wait, what is he talking about?" Amber crossed her arms, her smugness faltering just enough for me to see the cracks. "Don't be dramatic." Travis stood, voice rising. "Amber." She rolled her eyes, then snapped. "Fine. You want to know? It's not yours. There. Happy?" Travis's mouth parted like he couldn't believe what he just heard. "You told me." "I told you what you wanted to hear," she said with a. The air outside the camper van was thick with the buzz of whispers. I could feel the eyes of strangers on our backs, people who had no idea what we were walking away from, but knew enough to stay curious. I kept my pace steady as Mason and I crossed the gravel path, away from the wreckage of Travis's new reality and toward our car parked under a shady pine. My heart was still thudding from what Amber had admitted, and part of me wanted to scream it from the treetops. She lied. Travis. She used you. But satisfaction had already come in its own quiet form, watching the mask slip right off her face in front of everyone. We were almost to the car when I heard footsteps. Sharp, fast ones. I turned, expecting Travis, but it wasn't him. It was Amber. She stomped toward us, eyes blazing, mouth twisted in a snarl. "You think you've won?" she spat. You think showing up here with your brat and your fake drama is going to fix your pathetic little life? I squared my shoulders, blocking Mason slightly with my arm. Walk away, Amber. You've said enough. I'm not afraid of you, she snapped. Good, I said calmly. Because you should be afraid of what comes next. Amber's lips curled into a sneer, but before she could fire off another insult, a car pulled up on the road beside the campground office. A silver sedan. Clean. Conservative. The doors opened, and two people stepped out. Amber froze. Her face drained of color before the recognition even reached her voice. No. The woman was tall, neatly dressed in dark jeans and a blouse, her hair tied back, eyes laser-focused on Amber. The man followed, shorter, heavier, with a stiff expression that made it clear he hadn't come for a family picnic. I didn't have to ask who they were. Amber's silence said it all. Her parents. Amber backed up a step, genuinely shaken for the first time. What are you doing here? The woman approached slowly, like she was inspecting something unpleasant. We came to see for ourselves, she said coldly. After the boy came to our house. Amber's eyes widened, and she turned to me, then to Mason. You little freak. You went to my parents. Mason didn't flinch. I went to your old job. Talked to some people. Found a few pictures. Traced the address. They deserve to know. Amber turned bright red, her rage bubbling up like a geyser. How dare you go behind my back? Her mother cut her off. Enough, Amber. We raised you better than this. Amber stared at her, open-mouthed. You don't even know what happened. We know more than enough, her father said, arms folded. You lied. You manipulated that man. You humiliated yourself. And now you've dragged us into it. Amber's voice cracked. You're siding with her? We're siding with truth, her mother snapped. Something you clearly have no use for. She turned to me then, her face softening just enough to acknowledge me as a person. We're sorry, she said. Truly. We didn't raise her for this. Whatever she's done, she needs to answer for it. Amber turned in a full circle, looking for Travis, but he hadn't followed her. He was probably still sitting in that camper van, stunned by the implosion of the life he thought he'd chosen. Good. Let him sit in it. Mom, Amber pleaded. Please don't do this in front of them. Her mother's eyes narrowed. You did this in front of the whole world. You think you get to control the damage now? I watched Amber's composure shatter piece by piece. It was a strange thing, painful to watch, and yet I felt no sympathy. Not after what she'd done. Not after the theft, the lies, the smug smiles, and cutting remarks. She had crafted her little fantasy, and now it was dissolving right in front of her. And Mason had done it. Not me. Mason. He stepped up beside me and looked Amber in the eye. You could have just walked away. But instead, you hurt people. And now you have to deal with that. Amber's face twisted. You're just a kid. I'm the kid you messed with, he said simply. Bad choice. I couldn't have said it better myself. Just then, another car pulled up, this one black and marked. A patrol car. The campground manager must have called them earlier during the commotion, or maybe one of the guests had. Either way, it was perfect timing. The officer stepped out, took one look at the scene, and started toward us. Travis finally emerged from the camper van, his shoulders slumped. He looked like he'd aged a decade in the last hour. The officer waved him over, asked for ID, started asking questions. I handed over the folder of documents, proof of ownership, bank transactions, timestamps. Everything. Amber's parents stood a few feet away, watching her crumble in real time. Her mother's expression was unreadable now, her disappointment carved deep into her features. The officer turned to me after a few minutes. We'll have to sort this through proper channels, but this is enough to begin an investigation. Especially with a child involved. Travis said nothing. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He just looked at the ground. Amber, on the other hand, started panicking. Wait. What do you mean, investigation? You can't charge me. I didn't steal anything. Accessory to theft, the officer replied without flinching. If you knowingly benefited from stolen property, you're involved. Amber turned to her parents, frantic. Say something. Tell them I didn't know. Her father looked away. Her mother's voice was sharp. "We don't raise liars." Amber blinked like she'd been slapped. Then her legs gave out, and she sat right there in the dirt, stunned into silence. Mason exhaled beside me, a long, steady breath that seemed to take the last weight off his chest. "You okay?" I whispered. He nodded. "I am now." We stood together in the afternoon light as everything that had once been hidden was dragged fully into view. Lies, theft, betrayal, but also truth, accountability, justice. The guests no one expected had arrived, and they'd brought closure with them. I never used to believe in poetic justice. Life had always felt messier than that. Unfair, inconsistent, no real structure to who got what they deserved and who skated by untouched. But standing outside that camper van, watching Travis try to keep his crumbling life from blowing away in the breeze, something shifted. Maybe karma didn't move fast. Maybe it didn't always make a scene. But right now, justice had a front row seat, and I was finally the one handing out consequences. Travis wouldn't look at me as the officers asked him to sit down on the bench near the ranger station. His face was drawn, pale, like the weight of the day had finally dropped onto his chest. His shoulders slumped in defeat. The officer asked questions about the van, the account, my name on the loan, and I answered clearly, confidently, with every document to back me up. Amber stood off to the side, arms crossed, pacing like a caged animal. Her parents didn't even approach her. They stayed near the edge of the lot, quiet and tight-lipped, refusing to save her from the consequences she never thought would come. After giving my statement, I stepped toward Travis. The officers had said he wasn't under arrest yet, but there was enough to open a formal case. He could be charged with grand theft auto, financial fraud, and depending on what we uncovered with the bank, identity theft. All of it could be mitigated if he cooperated. "I'm not dropping the complaint," I told him, voice low and steady. "You took everything, Travis. You took money I worked for, a vehicle I financed, and you used it all to run away and build a life that was based on a lie. You don't get to walk away clean." He finally met my eyes, and for the first time, I saw fear there. Not regret. Not sadness. Fear. "Celeste," he said, his voice cracking. "I'll pay you back." "You will," I said. "Every cent." He nodded slowly, like he already knew what was coming. I handed him a slip of paper. "There's a job waiting for you at Gencor. Janitorial position. Factory floor. 12-hour shifts, rotating weekends. They already have your name. You'll start Monday." He blinked. "You got me a job?" I gave a humorless smile. "I set it up through an old contact. They're short-staffed. It's hard work, but steady. And the best part? Since it's legally tied to a company affiliated with my employer, your wages can be garnished." His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I continued. "You'll pay back the $22,000 you stole. On top of that, I've filed for child support. Retroactive and ongoing. You've dodged your responsibilities long enough." He looked away. "I don't have anything left." "You'll earn it," I said. "Day by day. The same way I built everything you threw away." Amber stormed over at that point, mouth tight. "Wait, I didn't take any money. You can't drag me into this. You said this was between you two." "Actually," I said, stepping toward her, "you benefited from everything he stole. You lived in the van. You traveled with him, spent my money, helped hide him." She crossed her arms, visibly shaken. "That doesn't make me a criminal." "Accessory to theft," I said flatly. "The police can figure out the details." Amber turned to her parents again, desperation leaking into her voice. "Say something. You know I didn't plan this." Her father didn't budge. Her mother just gave a soft, disappointed shake of her head. "You made your bed, Amber. You're gonna let them ruin me?" she shrieked. "No," I said, voice calm and controlled. "You did that all by yourself." An officer returned with forms and instructions. Travis would need to report to the local precinct for follow-up. The van was officially released to me. They took photographs for documentation. It was all so procedural, so cold. But behind every step was the echo of the chaos he caused. And now it was being processed, documented, contained. "Let's go, Mason," I said, turning toward the car. We started walking, but I paused one last time and glanced back at Travis. "You always thought I'd let things slide. That I'd stay quiet like I always did. But I'm not that woman anymore. You don't get the last word." "I do." He didn't say a thing. Just looked down at the gravel, jaw clenched, hands useless in his lap. Amber looked like she wanted to scream but knew it wouldn't help. I reached into my bag and pulled out the key to the van. It was scratched and sticky with old glue, but it was mine. I twirled it in my hand once before locking the door to the camper and sliding into the driver's seat of our car. Mason buckled in beside me. "You did it," he said softly. "No," I corrected him, turning the key in the ignition. "We did." We pulled away from the campground with the van in the rear view, a symbol of everything we'd lost and everything we'd reclaimed. Travis and Amber were left behind, sitting in the wake of the destruction they thought they could outrun. This wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about justice. About proving, to them and to myself, that I wasn't broken. That I wouldn't stay down. And payback? Payback was progress. The first thing I did when we got home was park the camper van in the driveway and just sit there staring at it. The afternoon sun glinted off the windshield, and for a second, it looked just like the dream it once was, the family getaway vehicle Travis and I had researched for months. Back then, it had symbolized freedom, adventure, the next chapter in our life together. But now it sat in silence, a monument to betrayal, loss, and the fire I'd walked through to reclaim my life. It wasn't a symbol of a dream anymore. It was proof of survival. Mason stood next to me on the sidewalk, hands in the pockets of his hoodie, eyes narrowed at the van like it was still a threat. I don't think he trusted it. And I didn't blame him. "You gonna keep it?" he asked finally. I glanced at him. "No. We're selling it." "Good," he muttered. "It smells like French fries and lies." I laughed, the kind of laugh I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. One that bubbled up without fear or exhaustion weighing it down. "You're not wrong." The sale went quickly. Once I listed it online with the legal documents in hand, a local couple drove out the next day, cash in hand, thrilled to find a practically new camper in perfect working condition. I handed over the keys with no ceremony, no hesitation, no lingering sentiment. Watching them drive off with it, all smiles and plans, felt less like a goodbye and more like an exhale. The check they gave me was enough to pay off the remaining loan in full. That weight, 35,000 pounds of it, was gone. I paid the bank first. Then I closed the account I once shared with Travis and opened a new one in my name only. Every dollar was now tracked, protected, guarded with the kind of vigilance I never thought I'd need. I wasn't taking any chances. The house felt different after that, lighter. As if the air had shifted, the ghosts that haunted the corners slowly drifting away. I walked from room to room like I was reintroducing myself to it. The living room where we'd once exchanged holiday gifts was now a quiet sanctuary of second chances. The bedroom, once heavy with memories of a marriage gone stale, became a space of peace again. I changed the curtains, donated the old bedsheets, rearranged the furniture just enough to make it feel new. I wasn't trying to erase the past. I was just reclaiming the present. My body, too, was slowly remembering how to feel whole. I went to my follow-up appointment and got the green light to resume regular activity. My energy wasn't where it used to be, but I wasn't crumbling anymore. I started walking again, stretching in the mornings, cooking meals that weren't from a box or a bag. I stopped surviving and started living deliberately, fully, with quiet pride in every step. And Mason, my beautiful, unshakable son, he rose right alongside me. He balanced school with more responsibility than any kid should have had to take on, but he never complained. He helped with groceries, cooked spaghetti on the nights I worked late, and even started a spreadsheet to track our expenses. One evening, I found him Googling scholarships and mapping out a 5-year plan to become a marine biologist. When I asked him why marine biology, he shrugged and said, "I like things that live in the deep. They survive where it's dark." I hugged him for a long time after that. Every night, after dinner, we'd sit on the couch together, just the two of us, and watch a show, play a board game, or talk. Nothing complicated. Just real time. We'd lost enough of it already. I wasn't going to waste another second pretending the world outside could wait. This, right here, was the life that mattered. And we were building it back piece by piece. Legally, everything fell into place faster than I expected. The child support order went through without issue. Travis didn't fight it, probably because he didn't have the energy or resources to argue. His wages from the factory job started showing up in the form of deposits to my account. Small at first, but steady. I didn't care how long it took. What mattered was that he was finally held accountable. I didn't hear from Amber again. Not a call, not a message, not a sign of remorse. Her parents reached out once, a brief email thanking me for handling things with more grace than they could have expected. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. People around town started noticing I looked different. Colleagues at the clinic commented on how my posture had changed, how I smiled more, how my laugh had returned. I hadn't realized I'd lost it. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any. But I think they saw the difference. I had stopped shrinking. One weekend, Mason and I decided to repaint the hallway. We blasted music from his playlist, half of which I didn't recognize, and danced around with rollers and splattered paintbrushes. At one point, he dipped his finger in the can and smeared a stripe down my nose. "Battle paint," he said, grinning. I tackled him with a pillow and chased him down the hall, both of us breathless from laughing. When we collapsed on the floor, side by side, paint streaked and giggling, I looked up at the ceiling and thought we made it. Not perfectly. Not easily. But we made it. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, I walked through the clinic with a confidence I hadn't felt in a long time. Dr. Kenner stopped me in the break room, sipping his coffee, and smiled. "You look different," he said. "I feel different." "Glad to have you back, Celeste," he said, and I believed he meant it. And I was glad to be back. But more than that, I was glad to be me again, stronger, wiser, softer in all the right places, and steel in all the ones that mattered. I no longer looked in the mirror and saw a woman holding herself together with duct tape and half-whispers. I saw someone who had fallen apart and put herself back together piece by jagged piece. That night, Mason and I sat on the back porch under a blanket, the night air cool around us, stars scattered like diamonds across the sky. "What do you think the future looks like now?" I asked him. He leaned his head on my shoulder. "I think it looks like us." I wrapped my arm around him, pulled him close, and let the silence stretch, warm and whole. We didn't need the past anymore. We'd lived it, survived it, learned from it. And now, the road ahead was ours. Not because it was perfect. Not because it was promised. But because we earned every single step of it. Together.